This episode of Paradigm Profiles is called Puppet Master. Imbued with the self-belief of a rock star, this murderous cult leader thought he was above the courts. And if not for a last-minute witness, Charles Manson may still have been free today. I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business, Tess Watson announced. A sleepy-headed Wojtek Frykowski had woken up on a living room couch at 1050 Celio Drive, the rented Hollywood home of movie director Roman Polanski and his heavily pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, to find a man standing over him, declaring his sinister beliefs. When Frykowski attempted to inquire as to what exactly was going on, Watson, armed with his .22 caliber high-standard Longhorn revolver, issued a death threat. Frykowski buttoned his lip and realized quickly enough that he, along with the rest of the house's occupants, were in big trouble. The date, August 9th, 1969, is written in human blood. Almost 50 years on, details of that horrific night caused revulsion, the senselessness of the murders, defining a specific existentialist terror. That anybody at any time can be the victim of deranged individuals. The brutality of the Tate LaBianca homicides is one thing. The sheer cold-bloodedness is another. Please let me go. All I want to do is have my baby. 8 months pregnant, Sharon Tate cried. Susan Atkins, one of her killers, responded, "Woman, I have no mercy for you." Charles Manson used sex, drugs, and counterculture spill to warp the easily persuaded minds of Charles Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, Steve Grogan, Bruce Davis, Susan Atkins, and Linda Kasabian, who turned out to be more resilient than the others to Manson's brainwashing methods. All were searching for something, be it adventure, spiritual uplift, or rebellion against society. They craved something to fill the holes in their hearts or personalities. They got Charles Manson instead. If they're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair, Scott McKenzie's classic hippie ditty advised. But it was in San Francisco, Flower Power Central, where ex-con and aspiring guru Charles Manson learned to crawl. Picking up his first collection of followers in the city and environs, he met Mary Brunner, a shy librarian in Berkeley, just across the bay. Yet, there was a darker side to the piece, love and dope shenanigans going on in the Haight-Ashbury, especially when the Big H began to flood the streets. One musician quoted in Jeff Ewing's 2013 Manson biography told it straight. Haight Street smelled like piss. All the people thought were running around with flowers in their hair were now lying around with needles stuck in their neck. Manson's path to cult leader began one day when some dude walked up to him and handed the ex-con a flower. The kind-hearted gesture knocked Manson for six, and he began to take a great interest in the speakers and gurus who spoke on the street corners about new ways of living. Celebrity life in Los Angeles in the mid to late 1960s embraced the counterculture hard. Many famous people had an open house policy. Musical artists and film industry types hung out with all kinds of folk in their palatial homes above Hollywood, often picking up dates and hangers-on from bars and clubs along Sunset Strip, taking them back to their pads for parties that could last for days on end. For the rich and famous, the era of free love, drug experimentation, and casting off 1950s conservatism was electrifying. Then came Charles Manson, with a cult of hot young waifs and pliable men eager to follow his every command. The 5'4" scruff bag preached love and rejected the vulgarities of the Western consumerist society. It was all a sham. Manson was the era's ultimate LSD trip gone wrong, and the subsequent trial was its frightening comedown. The murders happened at a very pivotal and dynamic time in the United States, Dr. Scott Banham began. It was the beginning of the Vietnam War and political unrest, student movements, the age of hippies, and the peace movement out in California. The murders were kind of a counterpoint to all that. Here was a group which appeared to be devoted to evil and the destruction of the world. It's a stark contrast to the peace movement at that time. So I think it was really a powerful movement or a powerful moment in the evolution of the United States. Crimes of that nature and that horrific would have an impact at any time, but given the time and place in history that it happened, it had a greater impact. October 1969, the family rounded up. "Hi," the diminutive man in a Davy Crockett type buckskin suit said as he crawled out from a tiny cabinet space in a house on Barker Ranch. His air of calm impressed the arresting officers, who threatened to gun him down if he made one false move. But Charles Manson's incredibly tranquil response to the raid at Barker Ranch on October 12, 1969 was an all-arrogant front. He thought the arrest would come to nothing and that he'd be released soon enough from his cell in Independence, California. Hedging a bet that the shit-kicker deputies responsible for his current predicament were racist, Manson told them about a race war brewing, an event he dubbed Helter Skelter, and thought it best to handcuff the irons. "Run for the hills," he told them. They weren't impressed, one iota. Manson's arrest was the beginning of a new round of drama at the end of his freedom in the outside world. First of all, the police in Inyo County hadn't a clue the man before them was responsible for orchestrating murder and mayhem back in LA. The cops thought they were busting a bunch of long hairs for grand theft auto. Having become aware of their presence in the area, a check on vehicle registrations revealed that several cars on the property were stolen. At the jailhouse, Manson was booked in as Manson Charlie M, aka Jesus Christ God. At trial, he declared dramatically, "Don't you know who you're crucifying?" Bond understands that Manson's outlandish statements and actions were motivated by a desire for control, recognition as an exceptional individual, and hunger for fame. Manson's character and personality, his background. Here's a guy who's not particularly educated, but he was very smart, an intelligent individual. He learned the hard way from the school of the hard knocks. I do believe Manson had delusions of grandeur from an early age. He believed he was destined for greatness in some way. Throughout his life, he exhibited characteristic paranoia. Sometimes he would say he was God, other times Satan. In a classic interview with Geraldo Rivera, Manson responded to the question, "I've heard you call yourself God, and at other times the devil. Which is it?" Manson responded, "What's the difference? They're both the same." It's that larger-than-life persona, and I think he envisioned himself that way. Those delusions of grandeur and persona fueled him to aspire to this helter-skelter. He was determined in some way he was going to be famous. If not as a great songwriter, then the world was going to remember him in some way. At an earlier raid on the Barker place on October 10th, while Manson was still in LA caging money for contracts, two young followers, Kitty Lutzinger and Stephanie Scram, who'd escaped the family but had become confused making their bid for freedom under the cover of night, appeared from bushes and asked to be taken into protective custody. Lutzinger was the ex-girlfriend of Bobby Barsoli, who had been her motivation for joining Manson. Barsoli, who was never an official member of the family, was currently banged up on murder charges relating to the killing of Gary Hinman, a music teacher and acquaintance of Manson's. Lutzinger learned from her mother back in LA that the police wanted to talk to her about Barsoli. Lutzinger agreed to cooperate with investigators, and she told them what Susan Atkins had confided, that Barsoli murdered Hinman on Manson's orders. But how did she know this? Well, she was there and she took part. This pricked the ears of the LAPD, but Atkins was about to unwittingly divulge much more. November-December 1969, Susan Atkins confesses. Arrested with the others at the Barker Ranch, Susan Atkins was transferred from Independence, California to the Sybil Brand Institute in LA. Assigned work detail, the talkative young woman befriended a couple of fellow inmates. Atkins' bunkmate, Veronica Ronnie Howard, and inmate Virginia Graham were taken aback by her cheery demeanor, yet recoiled at the gruesome stories divulged. As she sat idly in the jail's common room, Atkins discussed all sorts. Neither Howard nor Graham could have expected to play crucial bit parts in one of the trials of the century when they asked the classic question, "What are you in for?" Upon hearing her blabber on about the one in Benedict Canyon, the pair decided to act, though it took a great amount of guts, given the prison code about snitching. Snitches end up with stitches, but informing on Atkins might have well provided them with leverage when it came to their own trials. Atkins was very different from other Manson family believers. Her socioeconomic background and life story were closer to Charles than the clean-cut lives of many others in the group. Most of the girls were barely out of their teens or were young adults who should have been going to college or out there in the world enjoying themselves. Instead, Charlie's angels were really his puppets of death and destruction. Susan was one of Manson's most devout followers, but for a period of time against Charles and the family, offering to testify before a grand jury. Bond puts the fevered interest and shock at the crimes directly in relation to the inclusion of the girls, many of whom were attractive and photogenic. Scott Bond thinks the major cultural shock factor stemmed from this reversal. Tex Watson, too, was described as a good kid who'd lost his way to drugs while at college. When arrested in his hometown of McKinney, Texas, months after the killing spree, many in his neighborhood, friends he'd grown up with, and members of the Watson clan were completely stunned. The town sheriff was adamant that Watson's arrest was a mix-up. Bond attributed this twist and tale, the young woman as psycho killers, a major factor in its infamy. These were very pretty young girls, and how could they possibly be responsible for committing these terrible crimes? It's a contradiction. We are taught that young girls are typically the victims. So, these young girls committing unspeakable acts was shocking and confounding to the public. And you had their bizarre behavior in court, shaving their heads and all of that. Prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi was granted permission to listen to Susan's confession tape on December 3rd, 1969. Bugliosi was chilled to the core as Atkins related her recollections of the murders like she was reciting what she did for that day in school. In a meeting the next day, it was decided among the prosecutors and the defense team that Atkins' hot information was vital to law enforcement, and the people would not seek the death penalty against her in the Hinman, Tate, or LaBianca murder, on the condition that she provided testimony to the grand jury. So far, Atkins, although seemingly a beer short of a six-pack, had cooperated fully with the lawyers. The sweeter in the deal, however, was that if the co-conspirator changed her mind, and she eventually did, the grand jury testimony would be inadmissible in court. Bugliosi and his team were given a bitter pill to swallow, knowing Atkins' representative, Richard Caballero, had wrangled for his client an exceedingly good deal. By now, LAPD and Bugliosi were starting to ascertain the dynamics of the family, its individual members, alliances with the Straight Satans, a biker group and drug gang, the Spawn Ranch setup, and most of all, the mystery man who orchestrated the entire show. Manson, still locked up in Independence, was also starting to understand his helter-skelter plot had been wrecked, and the family and certain individuals were in his mind conspiring against him. These things fed his paranoia and delusions. Controlling others was his forte. Susan was out of his grasp and talking to the man. He hadn't a clue where Tex Watson was. He was lying low in Texas, nor Patricia in Alabama, or Linda Kasabian. She legged it after the murders and was in New Hampshire, where she confessed all to her mother. I think that Manson no doubt resented what he perceived as betrayal by the others. In his mind, he was the Christ who was betrayed by Judas. Kasabian's immunity deal. At first, Susan Atkins was treated like the linchpin to the whole sorry affair. Without her, charges against Charles Manson and Linda Kasabian were so perilously weak that they might walk. Bugliosi believed Atkins was telling the truth in her testimony, with a few crucial omissions to lessen her guilt. He believed she stabbed Tate. The lawyer was not at all shocked when, on May 11, 1970, Atkins signed off on what was a repudiation of her grand jury testimony. Bugliosi was now free to pursue the ultimate sentence, the big sleep, against Atkins. The gas chamber loomed. Atkins was now firmly back in the Manson family fold and determined to follow his every command. Manson had underlings visit Susan, Leslie Van Houten, and Patricia Krenwinkel daily, part of a scheme to keep them together, keep them brainwashed. The group shaved their heads, carved X's onto their foreheads, while outside court, members and family caused disruptions and protested. How could the pigs send their messiah to prison? Linda Kasabian was a 20-year-old mom when she fell into the Manson fold in the summer of 1969. She wasn't around long, but she was there for crucial events relating to the killing spree and would be the star witness for the prosecution down the line. She fled after the killings, sickened by Manson's actions, but most of all, Kasabian took a limited role in the Tate murders. Of the murder gang, Leslie Van Houten, Patricia Krenwinkel, Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Kasabian's moral compass was never truly broken by the Jesus wannabe. When Manson involved Kasabian in his inner circle, he made a big mistake. As media coverage intensified, the net closed in on Kasabian. She gave herself up and returned to California. The expression of remorse was sincere. At the point in time, she was the only one to talk about feeling guilty, while the others repeated their Manson top mantras. She longed to get everything off her chest, whether it meant spending the rest of her life in prison or facing the death penalty. Her lawyer, Gary Fleischman, insisted Kasabian say nothing until the district attorney's office presented an immunity bargain. In return, she would turn state's evidence. Fleischman's move was deemed very controversial, but Kasabian was far more reliable than Atkins. But how had Kasabian found herself in the grip of the notorious Charles Manson? Kasabian joins the family. Kasabian's husband, Bob, wished for a second chance with his young wife and invited her out to LA. A friend of Bob's, Charles Melton, had inherited a lot of dough and had a grand adventure planned, driving down to Tierra del Fuego, Chile, right at the tip of South America, purchasing a boat and sailing around the world. Bob had invited his wife and their daughter Tanya for the ride. The couple failed to put aside their differences. Then, one unfortunate day, a Manson family member, Catherine Scher, turned up at Melton's and told an attentive Linda all about the Manson and the commune they founded at the Spahn Ranch. Intrigued by Scher and her sales pitch, Kasabian and Tanya left Bob and moved to Spahn, where the brainwashing began, though not with Manson, but Tex Watson. Her indoctrination began with the breaking of the moral code. She was fed mantras like everything is permissible, right and wrong are nothing but constructs of the mind, there is no such thing as personal possessions. Watson then had sex with Kasabian and she experienced the death of the ego. It seems incredible that Kasabian was pushed to fleece Melton of his inheritance almost immediately. She stole $5,000 from his trailer in Topanga Canyon and handed it over to the family. When she finally met Manson, he zeroed in on her daddy issues and spun his dangerous philosophical aphorisms such as "no sense makes sense" and "never ask why." Kasabian fell in hard with the family, yet unlike the hardcore members, she never quite believed the stuff Manson spouted. While told her sexual encounter and the feeling she had afterwards was her ego's death, Kasabian was unsure about Manson and her fellow cult members. Kasabian was stronger psychologically than the others, that is, a stronger individual ego. After the Cielo Drive massacre, the night Manson instructed Kasabian, Sandra Good, Atkins, and Clem Grogan to murder a Lebanese man in the Venice Beach area neighborhood, Kasabian acted against the cult leader's wishes, pretending to be confused and deliberately knocking on the wrong door. Kasabian saved Saladin Nadir from being a Manson victim. Her day in court was fixed for July 27, 1970. In the corridors outside the courtroom, as Kasabian made her way to give sworn testimony, Sandra Good cropped out of nowhere and shouted, "Kill us all! Kill us all! You kill us all!" This concludes part 1. Part 2, Turning Point, the Black Sheep's Confession, will be next.